If your dog is doing things you find unacceptable, jumping on counters, grabbing shoes, chasing the cat, it doesn't mean your dog is bad. It means you haven't clearly taught your standards yet. As I've explained in earlier videos, the social compliance method works in 4 steps. Set your standards. Pay attention to your dog. Give a warning before the behavior happens. Deliver a consequence if the warning is ignored. This video is about that final step. If a dog ignores a warning and nothing happens, then the warning becomes meaningless and your dog is left guessing. What are the rules? Do they matter? Is this optional? That confusion is what creates chaos, anxiety, and sometimes even fear rather than structure. Many people either misunderstand it or avoid the idea of delivering an effective correction. A correction isn't punishment, it's not anger, and it doesn't look the same for every dog. To correct means to fix. That's it. If your dog repeats the unwanted behavior after you do something you thought was a correction, it was a failed attempt. What a correction looks like depends entirely on the dog in front of you. I have a very naturally compliant border collie. If I make a simple coughing sound, she immediately stops. In fact, correcting another dog around her can be difficult because she sometimes assumes she did something wrong. She's most comfortable knowing exactly what's expected. Now let's compare that adult border collie to raising a puppy. Around 12 weeks old, something shifts. The pup's desire to explore starts to outweigh his need to come when I beckon. Now, at that age, I don't expect true obedience. However, I can take advantage of a pup's innate motivation to return to safety when he feels uncertain or insecure. So one day, I call the pup. He turns, looks at me, and chooses to run the other way. That's the moment I take whatever I have, a brush, a spatula, and toss it over him so it lands in front of him. I call that, "The sky is falling!" Nothing touches the dog, but the timing connects everything. The call was the warning, don't proceed any further. The falling object was the correction. And if it's done right, that puppy turns and runs right back to me. I praise him profusely when he arrives. His choice to heed my warning is highly rewarded. With the pup, there was no physical touch to the correction. On the other end of the spectrum, there are dogs that haven't had the opportunity to exist in a trusting, respectful relationship with a person who has established the social rules. Those dogs can present with antisocial behaviors that might appear as excessive exuberance, fear, or even aggression. They haven't been taught the rules, and that leads to confusion. That misunderstanding can cause a dog to overpower a person with his size or even use his teeth to control what he feels is a chaotic world. In those situations, we need to emulate the way dogs correct each other, and quite often, that includes physical contact. The question then becomes, how hard should you correct a dog? Well, that's the $64,000 question. But I have a simple answer. Deliver a bee sting. In nature, warnings and consequences are everywhere. Brightly colored frogs warn of their toxicity. Coral snakes alert they are venomous. With their contrasting black and white stripes, skunks proclaim their power to overtake you through their obnoxious spray. And then there are bees. They don't hide their presence around their hive that they would protect with their lives, although I'm sure they would rather not do so. So they warn first with their very obvious black and yellow stripes, and then, if necessary, deliver something unforgettable. A bee sting doesn't cause permanent damage, but it creates a memory that could last a lifetime. Ask someone when they were first stung. They'll tell you the whole story. I was 5. I was in my grandma's backyard. There was a fountain with yellow flowers, and my grandpa was wearing blue overalls. There's a very clear memory. A perfect correction creates that lasting memory. It doesn't injure. It doesn't traumatize, but it does create an enduring behavioral change and reduces the need for future intervention. And that's the goal. So eventually, all I have to say is leave it, and the dog remembers the bee sting. The social compliance method is designed to emulate the way that dogs communicate and correct each other. So you may ask, how do I give a bee sting to a dog? That answer is it depends upon when in the process you take action. For any behavior, there's a threshold. If you input sufficient intensity to get above that threshold, you will change the behavior. You'll deliver the sting. If you fail to get above that threshold, I call it nagging or a mosquito bite. Very few people remember their first mosquito bite, but bee stings change behavior sometimes forever. It's important to avoid interacting with your dog in that nagging zone, below the threshold to change behavior. When you nag a dog, he senses something unpleasant, but it doesn't cause him to alter course. Finding the threshold gets further complicated because it can move. As a dog gets closer to reaching his goal, his drive and motivation to achieve it grows, which sends the threshold higher and higher and higher. The higher the threshold, the more intense a correction is needed to change behavior. And we want to avoid having to deliver a wasp sting. Consider a dog that detects a cat in the area. First, he just looks at the cat. Next, he stands up. Then he stares and perhaps even begins to quiver. Finally, he starts to move toward it and begin the chase. At each subsequent step, your control over the dog diminishes because your capacity to deliver a correction above the threshold becomes more challenging. That's why timing matters, and timing is best accomplished by paying attention. I want to live in a world where the threshold is very low, because that means I don't have to input much intensity to get above it to change my dog's behavior. There are two ways to keep the required level of correction lower. First, be proactive. It's essential to deliver the warning when the dog is still in the state of intention to break a standard or a boundary. This allows learning to take place. The level of the correction can remain low if it's given proactively. To be the most successful, pay attention to your dog's attitude, not just his physical behavior. If you can communicate, "Don't chase that cat," when your dog is only considering it, you will likely succeed in teaching him about your standard. Second, stay calm. Dogs don't respect frantic energy. You cannot convince a dog that you're in charge if you project a lack of confidence or you're frightened, anxious, angry, or disappointed. Personally, I believe remaining calm is the number one most important proficiency when teaching dogs. I don't enjoy correcting dogs, but if you want to change behavior, you need clarity, consistency, and follow through presented in a language that dogs understand from their point of view. That's how I achieve my ultimate goal. No collar, no leash. I speak, you listen. If you found this information helpful, please consider clicking follow. In the next video, I'm going to cover the tools we use when we correct a dog.